The following episode contains or may contain spoilers. So if you're spoiler sensitive, maybe beware.
Yeah, you sensitive people.
Get out.
No, get in. I just real quick, the whole sleeping thing. I feel like I've had a hard time waking up. Like I always set my alarm for like 6, and I can't. Like I look at it, I'm like, why? Like what? I don't. What is there to do? And then, like I just have a hard time. Like I have a hard time falling asleep, but I have a hard time getting up. I don't know. It's like the opposite for you guys.
Well, the thing. Well, no, but that is actually a symptom of brain parasites. So different kinds of worms or larvae. So just check it out.
Hopefully
You know,
get superpowers. I don't know what kind of superpowers I'd get from parasites or larvae, but
probably
Probably.
drooling and shitting your pants.
well, I already have that, so we're good. All right, welcome to the Phantom Zone. 3 fans, 1 podcast, and a sea of comics. I'm Noah.
Kayla.
And Jared.
Hey, that was flawless. We're getting it finally on episode 10,000.
Yeah. We had, when we did the names thing, it had been at an alpha level, which is not a bad level.
Oh my
but
God.
Now it's actually it's bumped up to the omega level. That's the sense I'm getting.
God.
Yeah.
I was like, what are you talking? Then I got it. So to understand what Jared's talking about, today we have a very special fan pick, Patreon pick episode, courtesy of Will. So he gave us a few choices, and we were already kind of thinking about this one, so we decided to take the concept he put forth and run with it. So he wanted us to do our favorite Omega level mutants, and we've talked about X-Men a little bit, but we feel like we haven't explored them enough.
Yeah.
Because they're this weird, like, subsection of Marvel, but they have their own universe almost, and they function in their own way.
Yeah, it's like a world within a world.
Right. And so we figured it was a good time to talk about them, and why not start with Omega level? So we're not necessarily talking about our favorites, but we're talking about what is an Omega level mutant, like what is Omega level, essentially, the concept of it. So, yeah, that's what this episode is about.
Well, look, I mean, like, it's also, first of all, I like doing these episodes. So if you're listening and you're on the fence about whether you want to donate for Patreon or whatever, please do, because because the thing is, we've thought about this subject plenty of times, right? But I don't think we would have done this episode without, like, we wouldn't have picked it, because then there's some issues that are going to arise. One of which is that I'm really on the fence about at least the way that Omega level mutants have been kind of handled generally, or what the status of this concept. Yeah, I mean, so I think what we should first of all explain, like, what Omega level mutants are in the most vague sense, in the broadest sense, like, what is the concept? And to me, the concept is just the idea of characters, mutant characters, especially in the X-Men world, where that they're so powerful, they're way more powerful than most mutants. Usually the idea is that they're, like, kind of incalculable or planetary level, or they can destroy just insane levels of power. That's what to draw you in here.
I think that's like, I mean, if you were just to do like a quick question, like speed round, and somebody was like, what's Omega level? You'd just be like, the most powerful of mutants. Like, that's what it is.
Yeah, satellite view. And
which is weird, because you said incalculable, but it's like, how are they calculating incalculable?
I mean, that's a survey of every single mutant with that same power.
well, that's okay. So there's so many ways to approach this. I mean, that's one that I actually found, as I did research for this, to be pretty interesting, which is, what does this mean? And you'll appreciate this, Kayla, I think. What does this mean in world versus what does it sort of mean out world? Right. Yeah. So in other words, like, who calculated that they're incalculable, or even, and I think this is interesting, whose rating system is this for? Because another thing, to give you some basic information for the listener, if you don't know, it's not just Omega level. The idea, and at least the comics have vaguely nodded at this, is that there are several classifications. They usually use the Greek alphabet or parts of it. So, you would had, for a time, alpha mutants or alpha level mutants were the really powerful ones. And usually it would be X-Men we would be familiar with, people like Storm or Professor X or something like that. And then, somewhere along the way, you got to up the ante. They started calling them Omega level mutants. Those were the most powerful. But you still apparently have Alpha and then some other ones like Beta and things like that.
Yeah, like Alpha level was the first, I think it was the first mention of this kind of power system that they were doing. Because that's what, they were just like, these are Alpha level. So, at that time, it was like, okay, these are the most powerful of the mutants, or at least like, in their class of powers.
Yeah. What's crazy to me is like theoretically an alpha level mutant could kill an omega level mutant. But he's still omega because he has the most powerful version of that mutation that they've found yet. So to me it's kind of just like a vague list of like, oh, we looked outside and we watched the news and it looks like Jean Grey is the most powerful telepath, but if a more powerful telepath were to come or be born, she would lose her spot as the Omega level and go down to Alpha level, and then that person would take the Omega level spot.
Yeah, it's well, you said a lot there, which is great, right? Like that, so because there's a few things that I think that are like super important to the concept. One is who is saying this. And you get the sense that the majority of this would have been from the perspective of like S.H.I.E.L.D. or some sort of government organization monitoring the power of these sort of things. And in that case, it would just be kind of vague unto itself. Yeah. It's like they're just observing mutants, or it's not like they would have had like some weird cellular metric or something like this. And actually, I just a piece of trivia that I found that the first use of the expression Omega level was from Nimrod, who is, our X-Men fans will know, a kind of hyper powerful sentinel from the future. And so
he's like the peak evolution, or the highest grade model that you could buy of sentinels.
And such a dick. Oh my God.
He also looks very odd. I've always been with that name. The name is kind of interesting. And then seeing him, depending on who's drawing him, it's like, who gave him the color scheme of like silver/white/pink? It's not menacing.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, in that X-Men cartoon, when they're like, it's Nimrod, that's Wolverine, right? It's Nimrod or whatever. And then it's like this, it looks like from the Lego movie, like something the little sister would have created. You know?
She's like, I like pink and white, and he's going to look like this weird bug. Like, okay.
But from a comic standpoint, I actually think it's beautiful design. It's just, the angles, and it's just interesting and striking and like foreign and so cool.
It is different.
But then the other thing that Kayla hit on there, I think, was the idea of that alphas can also kill the omegas and stuff. And that's super important because we kind of have to remember our omega level mutants are not actually omnipotent. That kind of gets, people forget that. Like, they are super powerful. That's absolutely true. But they have limitations. They lose fights. They fight one another, things like that. So it's really easy to just think that they're just godlike beings. And to be fair, some of them are, but not all of them.
Franklin. Yeah,
though I did some research, and Franklin's actually been kind of, he, when I was growing up, or not growing up, but like getting into comics, especially in the late 90s, like Franklin was the tip top of all, right? And I found out he's kind of been reduced some, and then there's been other mutants that they've brought out that are even more powerful. So yeah.
Well, okay.
Yeah, super annoying.
Yeah, and I think, so as I was doing research for this, and it was one of the things that I always, I guess, questioned, like, well, we'll get into more of like, I guess, what makes a mutant omega level. But one of the things that I thought was interesting in one of the first incarnations of it, or the classifications of it, was like immortal mutants, like mutants that like had a hard time dying.
And had a hard time.
Yeah, and I guess that's why Jean would be on there, because she doesn't really seem to ever die. And there's like future versions of herself and past and clones and whatever. But I always thought that was interesting, but I guess that's kind of gone away. So the definition of
Not
what...
for my person.
True. The definition of like an Omega level mutant seems to ebb and flow. It changes a bit, I guess, from decade to decade or writer to writer, or I guess a new character is born and then they're more powerful. So it's always interesting to see these type of power classifications change within the comics.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that I want the listener to walk away from, just like on my end, is that recently, Jonathan Hickman, in his like larger X stories, what was it? House of X and Powers of X, I think, was the first one. Now he's on to the X-Men, but that was the kind of like his
Dawn of X.
Yeah, it's him like kind of doing his X-Men world, and it's been incredibly popular now. But he was the first person to really codify the Omega level mutant notion. One, giving a kind of comprehensive list, and also giving a really strong, and in my opinion, bad definition of what this means. But I think it's important to mention, before Jonathan Hickman, which is very recently, this was never codified and really never seemed to be meant to be. Like it wasn't as if Marvel had some strong, explicit stance. So when I'm on the internet, I find that like, especially recent fans have a sense that this is a way more like kind of strict and worked out and like strongly limited category than I think it actually probably is.
Right. And I feel like there are some fans of the X-Men, or at least of the Omega level list, that are like diehard by it. And they feel like, with that list, it's definite and these are the best of the best and whatever. And even if they are in their own power class, I mean, it's not really a good way to categorize that, especially with comics. Like it just seems like Marvel itself doesn't even really acknowledge that.
Yeah.
It's more like fans doing it, if that
Absolutely.
makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's funny too, because like I grew up on like the early internet, arguing about like who would win in fights and yada yada and power levels and things like that. And the funny thing about that, yeah, totally. It's the nerdiest of the nerdy.
Like you had to go to a library and find somebody else.
The thing, if you remember, there was the internet before, social media was like just among other things, like different disparate websites and message boards, and people would argue these absolutely, and they would argue like power levels and fights and stuff. But here's the point, which is you notice fans put a lot more thought into what power levels are in a way that writers and editors don't really give a shit. And it's not that they don't care at all. Some do, some don't. But the point is that like their motivation is the art of the writing and the selling of the books. It isn't about creating a completely perfect, coherent, in continuity world. And I even think Hickman's definition that he's created for these things unto itself probably doesn't make that much sense. And post Hickman probably isn't going to last that long.
Right.
That's my reading of it, but it's just, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, if we're the Jonathan Hickman list, it's nice to, I guess, have like a definition, or at least like, this is what Omega level mutant is. And these are the people that are on it and why they're on it. But when you do that, I think when you over-explain something like that, or try to make it make sense, it tends to kind of backfire. Or if anybody's been reading Jonathan Hickman stuff, he likes to put like these like wiki pages in there, or like these like blurbs about like, this is this organization and this is who's on it and they're from this. Yeah. It's like, okay, well, that's cool, but like, do I need to know this information? Like, I guess it's nice to know, but you know what I mean? Like, it just kind of gets a lot.
Here's the thing about Hickman, and I think that because I read his Fantastic Four stuff and his Avenger stuff before this, and all writers have strengths and weaknesses, so this is not as much a criticism as it might sound. He is super good at world building and lore. And that's why it makes sense that he would have all these intricate definitions and lists and like diagrams. Literally, I mean, he has like it looks like a science book in his work a lot of times. He often gets criticized for having stories that sort of maybe are not, I don't want to say directionless, but like where the story itself isn't so strong relative to the world building and everything like that. So
like there's a lot going on.
Yes, a lot of moving pieces, and you kind of get lost in the A to B to C causal linear story. And you know, your mileage may vary as how important that is anyway. But I think for the listener, because I think this has been like really important, maybe we should like read like what his definition for omega level mutants is, because it's hyper specific.
Yeah. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, that's what I was kind of
Ahem.
So this is according to Jonathan Hickman. So an omega level mutant is a mutant whose dominant power is deemed to register or reach an undefinable upper limit of that power's specific classification.
So super simple so far. So far, we're not crazy or not weird or self-contradictory or anything like that.
Right.
How do you measure potential for a mutation?
And
Good fucking question.
Right. And I think that's when it gets a little dicey.
And it's about to get way dicier.
Yeah. So, for example, both Magneto and Forge are the most powerful mutants of their power types on Earth. So magnetism and technopathy. But what makes Magneto and not Forge an omega level mutant is that the upper limit of Forge's measurable powers could hypothetically be surpassed. So, like, I think that's where these get a little odd. Like, and I think that's what I was explaining with when you try to define something, you can't necessarily define something that's undefinable.
Yeah, or would be better if it was undefinable.
Right. Yeah, and while the upper limit of Magneto's power can't be surpassed in any measurable fashion. So
many questions here.
And this is that's it. The Earth is like, I'm not gonna. I guess people can't be born with a more powerful magnetic mutation than Magneto. There's a list that says
it's crazy. And what it also means, right, is that like you can't, I mean, supposedly you shouldn't have, once you have a character who's an omega level, because their power represents something whose potential couldn't be surpassed, even hypothetically. Like, it'd be one thing to be like, he's the most powerful one, but it can't even be imagined a more powerful character. The problem is that Hickman himself, in his list, has two characters with the same level of power. So it's literally a logical contradiction. If you have one telepath, then no one should be hypothetically more powerful, unless you're saying that they have to have the exact equal amount of power, in which case, like Kayla's question, she keeps, I think, rightfully bringing up, which is, how do they know? Like,
like, how are you measuring unmeasurable power? And like, how are you saying that these two telepaths are at the same level? Like, maybe the feats that they do. I mean, I guess that's one thing.
And to if it sounds like we're being too punctilious or what have you, here's the thing: the thing itself suggests it's giving an explanation, and that's the thing that invites you to be like, hey, this doesn't make sense. And the reason I say that is if it was just like, oh, these super powerful, the most powerful, can't be limited, we would be like, oh yeah, that makes okay, totally got it. But because it tries to like, and I actually want to almost phrase this as a question. It's like, it wouldn't it kind of be better if this was left mysterious? I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I don't think there's a really good reason why the list exists. I think it would maybe function better if it was a category and not just one person can be an omega level. If it was just like something measurable that kind of jumps them into the next bracket. like, oh, well, because you can do this with your telekinesis, you're technically an alpha instead of a beta level. But in order to reach the omega, here is this arbitrary rule that you would have to pass.
Sure.
And it's, it's more like group or categories instead of like one person holding that top title. Because again, I feel that really backs people into a corner. And then, like we've been talking about, there's no way to measure potential. Someone could be born, quote unquote, in the universe tomorrow and have, more Healy
like the
powers
character I'm talking about.
Yeah. So.
And we don't have a strong sense about what it's referring to, even in its own concept. So, like you mentioned, I mean, like, is it what their powers could hypothetically do, or is it like powers that they've shown, like that they've actually demonstrated? Like you mentioned, how do they get at potential? Some of the characters too, like it's all like Iceman, when he was originally sort of suggested to be an omega level mutant or super high. It's actually well before this. There was a sort of like character defining moment where Emma Frost goes into his mind and finds out like, oh, he's super powerful. He's just holding himself back or hasn't lived up to his potential or something like that. So in a weird way, Iceman always makes the list, but he hasn't. I mean, since then he's done stuff. Don't get me wrong, but when he was first put on the list, it's like Emma Frost just kind of detected his power juice or something like this. Not really clear.
somebody was like, "You're an Omega level mutant now," and then they, I guess, called into the hotline and put him on there. Like, I think that's what makes this list so weird. I mean, could anybody be like? I mean, what if she looked into Jubilee's mind and she found out that she could explode every single molecule if she wanted to, like into pretty little fireworks? Like,
well, so big thing.
I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I think so. We've kind of put on the table, at least, like the definition's kind of weird now. It maybe doesn't make the most sense, or at least from our perspective. Some people may have a great reason why this is like perfect or something like that. But another thing I think it's interesting to mention, it does sort of suggest how the X-Men think about power and like what powers have a tendency to like dominate and stand out. So in the X-Men world, for whatever reason, I think some of it's just arbitrary. It's some character's popularity. Psionic power. It's not the only one, but it stands out as one that really dominates like the most powerful characters. And if you read X-Men comics, maybe that seems natural, but I think if you compare them to DC, it's a good example of how in DC, the telepathic or telekinetic characters aren't necessarily the most powerful. They have a tendency to emphasize more like physical powers like Superman or the Flash or something like that.
Yeah, in case in point, on DC's side, you have Martian Manhunter, which is supposed to be like one of the best telepaths, but he has shapeshifting and intangibility and super strength and all these other powers. So it's like most of the time he's just like a psychic link to all of the Justice League to talk to each other. Like, so I mean, yeah.
But it
loves their telepaths and
and I just think it's worth pointing out that it's like they're not necessarily it's easy to sort of just take that as a given, but it's more or less the idea that psionic characters would be the most powerful is more or less kind of like just an artifact of X-Men history.
Yeah. And I did want to point out with this list, because it was written down, that Omega level is a classification of a single mutant power.
That's right. Yeah.
So some might manifest other powers, but only one of those is typically Omega level, at least with Jonathan Hickman's list.
Yeah, so, that's another thing he invented.
Yeah. So, for example, while Jean Grey is both a telepath and has telekinesis, she's only Omega level telepath, not telekinetic. So, I don't know.
Well, it is weird too, because like let's say you had another character that just had telepathy but was on a similar scale as her. According to this sort of like category, they wouldn't be much more powerful, right? Or less powerful. They'd be very similar. But Jean also has this entire other sort of like psionic bag of tricks with telekinesis, and you would think common sense would suggest she's twice as powerful, right? She's got twice as many powers. But this list, it's not that it would refute that, it just wouldn't have anything to say about it. And so you wouldn't get the whole idea of like their actual power level.
Yeah. I think a good thing. So before we move on, I don't know. I mean, people may have looked at the list. People may not. People, we have tons of listeners that may not even read Marvel and they're listening to this. Great. But I think we should, I guess, name off who's on Jonathan Hickman's current list.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And what their powers are. That way it kind of makes sense on like why we're like, well, how is this one on there and not this one? And,
All right. Name Jamie Braddock, alias Monarch, Omega Power, reality manipulation, and then Quantum, of course. No alliance.
That's the kind of, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like the kind of reality manipulation.
Oh, because you know who's at the bottom or towards the bottom of the freaking list with reality manipulation?
Yep.
Franklin!
And then we have Robert Drake, or Bobby, Iceman. He has temperature manipulation negative, which
because he makes shit cold.
Thanks for telling me, Jonathan Hickman, that
the Iceman
he can only go down. He can't go up in temperature.
Well, I mean, that is true. I mean, it doesn't necessarily make sense, but it is kind of true. The next one, Joshua Foley, Elixir, biokinesis. So Elixir, we'll go into him later. So I'll leave him a mystery for now.
Wink.
Wink.
Jean Grey. What? She's on the list. Marvel, alias Marvel Girl. Omega powers, telepathy. Not her telekinesis. It's specifically telepathy.
Right.
Which is kind of what they have developed to. But what is interesting about that, just to say briefly, is that like originally Marvel Girl was a telekinetic with mild telepathic powers. You even see that in the first X-Men movie. And for whatever reason, they've decided to emphasize Jean Grey's telepathy more than her telekinesis. I don't know that I love that, but okay, it is what it is.
And then we have David Haller, Legion. I love Legion so much.
Yeah, cool.
He has power manifestation. So that just means that he can manifest powers.
He's a schizophrenic. He's a schizophrenic, and his different personalities all have different powers. Some of it ridiculously high.
Yeah, he's like, for those Doom Patrol fans out there, he's like Crazy Jane, with each one of her personalities has a different power.
Yep.
So. And
he should be David Xavier because his dad is Professor Xavier.
Yeah.
Anyway, Eric Lyncher is next, who actually, I think Max Eisenhardt's his real name. It's Magneto, is the omega power of magnetism. And it's his powers have ranged over the years, but he has done some truly global level stuff. So yeah, you can't, he has to be on there.
Mm.
Oh God. Kevin McTaggart. Proteus. Reality manipulation, but psionic.
Okay, what does that mean?
So Proteus is this character. He is from the Claremont run, and he has high levels of telekinesis and telepathy. But one of the things he does, he possesses people. He's like a kind of a non-embodied spirit, kind of or psychic phenomenon or whatever. But he can sort of like alter reality, in a proximate way, using his psionic powers, meaning it kind of only affects his immediate area, but in that area he can warp reality to his whim, basically.
Right.
Super
that's
powerful.
That's why I wanted, like, at least for the listeners to know what psionic reality manipulation is, because that's not a phrase you hear every day.
Yeah, and I don't know that it should matter here either. Like, I don't really know. I think there's so many reality manipulation on the list. He's just trying to give it a little flavor that they're distinct in some way.
It's just more of like illusion reality manipulation. Like he can do it around him, kind of like.
But it is, except it is real. Like he can. You know what I mean? Like
that's what I'm saying. But it's like fucking what's his name, Thanos doing it to the Guardians.
Yes,
like,
great
with the
example.
Stone. Yeah,
great example.
So, it's Kayla. Yeah,
I just did that one.
Oh no, that's right. We were just talking about. Yeah, that's you.
Absalon
Mercator.
It's last
Mercator.
Okay, that's cool. Mr. M, matter manipulation.
Cool.
Check him out. He is actually one of the newer characters. Super interesting. Straight up like Molecule Man. No clicks and buzzes. Yeah. Here's one of the more contentious ones on the list, I think. Though I love this character deeply. Aurora Monroe was a Storm weather manipulation. She just has only, I think, recently been made considered this level of power. And I want to be clear here too, because we talked about Iceman and her, and I've got not into hot water, but like I said something about this on Twitter, and people think immediately if you think that they shouldn't be as powerful, that means you don't like the character, which for me, I just like that Storm was like this second level after Jean Grey, just because it was cool having different X-Men of different levels of power. Mm. So, it's like if Jean was at a 10, and let's say Wolverine's around a 4, it was cool to have a 7 or an 8 in there. I think that's a good range for storytelling and to have that variety. So anyway, Storm is now considered on the level, and I love her, so I don't want to dispute it too much, but, just it has a recent increase.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Sorry, I got distracted. Is it Benet? Because it looks like French.
Yeah.
Benet du Paris. Exodus is telekinesis.
He's Exodus is a villain, and he's 12, I think, 13th century France. And
I thought you were going to say he's 12. I was like,
I know. I was like,
no, he's an ancient being. Apocalypse is involved with storytelling, and just the last thing, he's got the telekinesis. He's also a high level telepath as well, but they had to pick one. So
obviously not high enough.
Yeah,
because he's on here
to
for his
compete
telekinesis.
with the 2 other telepaths on the list.
Yeah. And then we have one of my favorites, Quentin Quire, aka Kid Omega, for telepathy.
Him and Jean have to fight for the death.
Yeah, I mean, like, how does that even... Okay.
We don't... It's completely...
I'll be up here. Oh, God.
Yeah. Jared.
Oh, I thought... Oh, shit. Sorry.
We have
so
one job here, guys.
Franklin Richards is alias now, lately is Powerhouse, and reality manipulation. Even though he can do all kinds of other shit, they have Universal here Franklin's created the ability to create pocket universes. I mean, he has almost unlimited power. He can do almost anything, but that's sort of one of the things. And
I love that on this
if you
list,
don't know,
he's the only one in red.
Because he's a human.
Yeah, because he
and his code name is Powerhouse. He can just eat all the other people on this list for breakfast.
Well, the reason he's in red here is because he's one of the few mutants that isn't on Krakoa, the current storyline. If you guys don't know, and the reason being is that he is the son of Reed and Susan Richards, or I think did she keep her last name? Yes, Susan Storm.
I know, but it's
you say Sue?
Storm. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, fair enough. But anyway, point being, there were just some great confrontations where, Xavier was like, hey, Franklin's the greatest mutant of all time, or one of them at least. Let's have him be on Krakoa. And, Sue and Reed were like, yeah, we're the fucking Fantastic Four. We're going to handle our kid. Okay, you bald son of a bitch.
Side note, I'm glad they did that only because the Fantastic Four had just come back. And it's like, I don't want them to separate again. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It's nice to just have the family together again.
And also, the less amount of stories that Franklin is in, the better.
True. All right, we got 2 more.
Gabriel Summers, alias Vulcan, energy manipulation.
Yeah, and then, look at that. Another Summers on the list. Hope Yay! Summers.
Yeah.
Her alias is Hope. Okay.
Nice.
Good job, Hope. Keep working on that. And it's power manipulation is her power. So.
Oh, I wanted to just real quick. Gabriel Summers, Vulcan. Just so you know, he's like Magneto with the electromagnetic spectrum, so he can like absorb and channel and but just any kind of radiant energy. And he's Cyclops and Havoc's other brother, and he's a fucking lunatic. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
That usually seems to be the case.
Yeah.
I love that family so much.
Yeah.
They're funny.
They're a turbulent lot.
Freaking mess. The Summers are a mess.
Normally, the more powerful a character, the more boring I actually find them. But the Summers are kind of the exception. I just think they're so chaotic. It doesn't matter how strong they are because they'll self-sabotage.
That's so
yeah.
true. It's so true. So yeah, that's the list. It's changed because, there's been new characters introduced, and I mean, Jonathan
Hickman. It's a
Hickman,
rotating title, like I said.
Yeah, and I appreciate what Jonathan Hickman is doing with the list. I think, it's nice to be like, okay, this list is being recognized in some way. This is what it means to be on the list. But I think with the general concept of it, and then the concept being within this specific story of Krakoa and all that, so it's not exactly clear yet if this list is really going to matter in the overall story, or even after Hickman has left X-Men. But I mean, I guess it is, kind of cool that he did it, because look, we're talking about it now. I mean, there's enough here to discuss and kind of interpret this, because you don't see the X-Men walking around being like, oh, there's Jean, she's Omega level. No, there's Hope, she's Omega level. She gets the nice table.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, that there's a level of detailed world building here that the natural storytelling wouldn't bore out. So that's a good point. That it's nice that in some sense he did that kind of like more detailed, articulated work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I mean, I know there are some potential confusing things that can happen with Hickman's redefinition.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I just feel, and I've mentioned these things before. I think we've already dealt with them sort of in detail, but like, yeah, I think I think he didn't think this out that well, and I think maybe the idea is he didn't need to, right? It wasn't really helpful for the stories or something like that. But the logical implications do actually get sort of confusing. Did you actually want me to go through them in a more detailed way, Noah, or just like?
Well, you wrote them on the thing, so that's
yeah. I mean, that was more for y'all to just kind of see how it doesn't completely make sense. But okay, like, so we've mentioned. That's fine.
I'm gonna cut this part out. So just
yeah.
You took time writing that part, so I don't know if you want to look at what's on there that we haven't already said. Mm-hmm. That way, you can make sure you say it. Just
so we didn't
speaking specifically to Hickman's list.
Yeah. So we tackled 3 already. Done 2 already. Let me see. Done 1 already.
Number four is interesting, so you could probably.
Oh yeah, that. So 4 is the only thing we haven't mentioned, and then the only other thing I'd like to do before we get over to the subtopic or to the spotlights is just talk about how the X-Men have experienced power creep generally, and you know what I'm saying. But yeah,
so you can handle just. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and the last thing I'll say about that's sort of weird here too, just to give you a sense of the weird limitations of the list, is that prior to this list, Omega class existed, Omega level existed, and there were characters who were stated to be actually above Omega level or beyond Omega level. Exactly, right? So
this is Mila's favorite.
yeah. Well, and by the way, some of the there are characters in the history of the X-Men and other Marvel comics that sort of orbit them that those characters are dead or off-world, and that's why they didn't make the list. So if you're curious, like why didn't Jamie Braddock make the list? Or actually, I think he did, but like there's I can't remember. There was at least 1 or 2 characters that I recognized that weren't on there. Anyway. But like Mr. M, Mercator, we mentioned him, Matthew Malloy, Vulcan, and actually Krakoa, the island itself, have all been stated to be above Omega level. So now it's not really clear what that would even mean with Hickman's paradigm or whatever. So we don't know if that's a full retcon or like whatever. And then the other thing, and this is something I wanted to open discussion to you guys, is that I think people love stories about hyper powerful godlike beings, and that's why this stuff does get traction in the stories. But I think what we also see in X-Men comics is a thing that I think of as like power creep or like power ratcheting or OP, whatever it is. And it's important to say that like when this comic started out in like with the 5 characters, the original, or even in the giant size X-Men, like the concept with these were all characters that had different, gifts and powers and stuff like that. But they weren't, these sort of like mountain shattering, reality manipulating beings. And now you have like 4 or 5 X-Men characters that are all Omega level. And I'm not sure that I like that better, honestly. I mean, I like it for some characters some of the time, but yeah, so I figured you might especially Kayla, because I know this is kind of a pet peeve of yours.
I mean, it's kind of like if there was a whole bunch of Dr. Manhattans walking around, I don't think the story would be very interesting. And I don't actually think that having one Dr. Manhattan around isn't like inherently more interesting just because he's more powerful. The reason that he works in stories is because he doesn't use, like he has like set rules and what he will or won't interfere with, or he's distant. Yeah. And so I feel like if there's a lot of really powerful characters, especially because in X-Men, it's in it like an ensemble cast a lot of the time, most of the time, that if all these people are reality benders, like this is why I'm like Franklin should not be in a single story ever unless he's, like, oh, he's knocked unconscious. It's like he can't use his pocket universe to put the new like world-eating monster into a different dimension.
Right. Like you kind of have to, in a way, walk him back a bit because you built him up too much.
Yeah, I feel like the more power you give these characters, the more you have to really think about how to limit them. And like Jared had mentioned on the doc, that's why Jean Grey is dead or missing most of the time, because she can't just be in every single mission. Otherwise, Jean will take care of every single mission. It's why the Flash is knocked unconscious all the time.
it's very true. Like, and this idea, like, if you love a character, it makes sense that you want to see that character flourish and like rise above. And the more I think. The people that don't think of this from a writerly standpoint, I think oftentimes they want it in the most maximalist language. But ironically, it's a ticket to have your character used less in the comic.
Yeah.
Jean Grey has spent literally decades at a time not being in the comics, and a lot of that is because of how powerful she became and thus how useless she is for certain stories.
The Flash, too.
Yeah, it's like, they're fighting random government officials. Why doesn't Jean Grey insert everything she could possibly do to stop them, which would be over in 5 minutes?
Yeah, it's like, unlimited power means limited potential.
That's from a story standpoint, yeah, absolutely.
Before we get to our spotlights, so I like doing this and I like posting a question on social media that has to do with the episode that we're going to be recording, because it's nice to see what other people think and if it's good enough, say it on the podcast. But so recently, we had asked a question, who isn't on the current Omega level mutant list that should be? And some of the answers that people said were interesting. There's one in particular.
Meaning dumb?
No, there were some dumb ones. There were some dumb ones, and I'm not going to say them. But there was one, and I'm not going to say these people's names because they didn't give me permission. You can just go on our Twitter account and look at
Follow them at.
Yeah, and then send them hateful. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, harass them at.
Yeah, and like maybe some of these characters have changed over time, but the base level of their power. So this person said Leech. So I thought that was interesting because they said the reason is if you can turn off an Omega level mutant's powers, you should be considered Omega level mutant yourself. So I always thought that was interesting. Like if they can turn off the powers, why can't, you know what I mean?
They're would that go to power manipulation? So wouldn't they have to fight Hope Summers for her title in Omega level?
Yeah, not to mention, I mean, like you can go into like Jean Grey's bed while she's sleeping and like give her sleeping pills and kill her, and it's a whole image or whatever. But like the fact, and this is the point, which is like people forget like these aren't omnipotent characters. They're characters that have a power that has a kind of unlimited potential in a certain way. Yeah. But so Leech has a very particular ability that exploits the fact that these characters have mutant genes or something like that. But that doesn't in and of itself. So for instance, if a character doesn't have a mutant power, Leech has no effect whatsoever. So you have to factor that in. I mean,
it was just an interesting thought. It's like, okay,
it is, yeah.
So, I mean, he's like a walking human EMP for.
I think we were talking up top about how technically, like a alpha or beta level could probably kill some of the Omega level mutants. Probably not Franklin, but
I mean, if Wolverine puts claws in your dome, or Gambit puts a grenade in your mouth, you're gonna die, or most of them. Also, I want to say that leech thing is actually something that happened in the comics. So that's where they got that reference. He shuts off Mercator's power, and I don't want to let you know what happens after that. But Mr. M doesn't do so well after that. So
yeah, and then another example, and I kind of agree with this, is Polaris.
Sure.
Only for the fact that, because I did look this up after this person said it, because I was like, wait, did he? Magneto himself said that she was more powerful than him. So it is interesting that...
But Magneto has more potential.
Whatever the shit that means. Also,
he can lift more paper clips at one time than Polaris can.
And that's absolutely true. But there are really got 100 mutants that have been named as being insanely powerful, and so many of them. You could just pick Sunfire and say Sunfire is a Japanese character that has the ability, it creates like atomic fire. You can just all of a sudden say his upper limits are you can create many suns, and he's all of a sudden on the list. So many characters just have a potential. If a writer wants to designate them, they can.
Right, and that's why I'm saying like this list, because it just shows that like there's obviously something wrong with this list in the general concept of it. And I did want to point out, because Jared and the person that suggested this episode had a little funny back and forth. Because I had asked who should be on the list and then whose place should they take. And Jared had said Professor X and to take off Iceman. And the person that suggested this, Will, he was like, he's a Iceman like fanboy. So he was like, nah, you can't do that. And I agreed with him. I was like, no, leave Bobby alone. Like, keep him on the list.
I'll add this because I think if somebody says Bobby should be the most powerful mutant character ever, they're not wrong. Like, it's a choice. I respect it and everything like that. And also, I'm a huge Thor fan, so I'm like, yeah, he should be the most powerful at all times. I totally relate. So, but the one thing I will say is that there is, I think, another thing to consider is if you make a character really, really powerful, there's a question about how would it affect their psychology, and we kind of forget that a lot of these characters are they are, some of them are crazy because they are this powerful, or they have. Yeah, Legion, or they have insane levels of stress and ruin, like Jean Grey, or they've been corrupted by that power morally, like Exodus. So you have all that kind of stuff. And the thing I love about Iceman is there's a frivolity to him. There's a fun lightness to what he is. And so I'm not saying it necessarily does, but there is a risk that having a godlike power can, you can create stories that put that intention in an interesting way, but you can also have, that it just cutting in to his character traits that are cool and positive. So, I actually think it's probably not been great for the character, but that's just me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, are you guys as confused about this list as we are? It's fun. It just adds another layer to, who would win in a battle, type of thing. I think it's a good time to get into our little spotlights. The spotlights are not necessarily different, but it's the people that are on the list that we mentioned that either we wanted to talk about or we wouldn't normally get to talk about. Most of it's for me personally, most of it's going to be focused on their power.
Yeah, it's not the typical deep dive of a character. It's mainly just in reference to what we're talking about, but you'll get a little background.
Yeah.
All right, so for my choice, I'm going to do Joshua Foley, which is Elixir. I've always kind of had a fascination with characters that can heal or have, like, healing powers. And Josh isn't the stereotypical, like, soft healer boy that you would think, even though his name is Golden Boy. What?
Kayla, do you usually, when you play like WoW or whatever, are you usually like a healer character?
It depends on if I'm playing with friends or not, because the pressure gets a little bit too much for me, because people tend to blame the healers for a lot of stuff going wrong. So I'll usually just be a DPS so that people are like leaving me alone and I'm part of the bigger group.
I'm usually a healer because I'm like a begrudging healer, because it's like, I don't trust somebody else to heal me. So it's like, I'll just do it myself.
Yeah, you're like, I'm a person. I'm not like a fanny pack filled with healing potions.
Yeah, I would cave into the pressure and be like crying. I'm so sorry I let you die.
She just deletes WoW.
Anyway, Josh is kind of an asshole at the beginning. He's picture like the stereotypical jock like bully in all of the teen movies, and that's him. Where he's like the jock, he's really good at sports, he's really popular with his friends, and girls are like, "Damn, I'd hit that," and. He joins a mutant hating group called the Reavers. So, just when you thought it couldn't get worse.
The Reavers are fucking awful, and if you don't know them, they are basically, if you've seen the movie Logan, all the cyborg dudes that he's fighting and running away with Laura, that's the Reavers. Fuck those guys. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
I know, and he's just part of the team. But basically, him and his friends attack a group of Xavier students. It was one of the squads led by Moonstar, and Josh's friend is injured. Before this, he had like healed a little bit of a slice on his hand, and he's like, I'm not a mutant. That's not possible. One of his friends gets injured. He heals the friend, and then, of course, he tries to hide the secret because he's part of a mutant-hating group called the Reavers. And it doesn't work, and then all of his friends turn against him, and then his parents disown him, and then he has to go to Xavier School. And he's adopted by, basically, Moonstar is like his official guardian. And that's his origin about how he joined the X-Men. He hates them.
Yay!
Take that, you bitch.
Karma. And in terms of like why he's considered an Omega class mutant, he is Omega class, like we had mentioned, in biokinesis. So he can control the biological structure of his own and other people's body down to the genetic level, which means he could basically has... At first, it was just like, I can heal burns, I can heal stab wounds, I can make you go owie if I touch you. But in one of the stories, he is killed, and once he's resurrected, it kind of unlocks this potential in him. I think this is what classified him as the Omega level. He can now, like, resurrect. I think Magneto hypothesizes when he's on Genosha one time, he could probably resurrect the 16 million deceased mutants that were on that in that place at the same time. And basically the only consequence is it leaves him totally drained and he passes out. He is in a coma for a couple of days, but he can resurrect potentially millions of people at once. Including himself, so he's basically immortal. He can resurrect himself if he dies. He can sense life force in other people, so he can tell if people are slowly dying. He's getting good. I think one time he put a brain tumor in someone's head and he made it the X-Men logo as a ha ha ha. So he's kind of
God damn.
I mean,
that's a lot.
That's really cool.
He has like a death touch, and again, he used to have to be able to touch people to heal them or to hurt them, and now with his powers just progressing the way they are, I guess he could just be near someone and be like, you explode, you heal, you explode.
He has reached a Omega level.
Yes, yeah, exactly. He's kind of really powerful. But he has a secondary mutation, is what Beast hypothesizes. His skin changes colors. If he's healing people, his skin turns gold, like a metallic gold. And if he's hurting people, his skin turns like a metallic black color. People are thinking it's kind of a nod to the elixir of life. Like the Fountain of Youth. It's like what old alchemists used to go after. As like a nod to his name, because the elixir of life is gold and the elixir of death is lead. So they're thinking maybe his skin just transforms to that when he's helping or hurting. I
gotta say that like that secondary mutation, not as impressive as the first. The first is like the power to decide life and death at a global level, and the second is like, oh, he also changes color. As thing he does.
I'm thinking he's mentioned sometimes it's hard converting back once his skin turns black, to gold. So I don't know if they're gonna like do something with that, but I think it's probably just philosophically like he's probably supposed to use his powers to heal, and if he's having a hard time going back after he uses his power to kill people or damage them, I don't know.
He's cool.
He's like a walking mood ring.
Yeah,
yeah.
I liked this character a whole bunch more after doing all this research. So
that's how I am every time I do research on a character.
Yeah.
He's pretty cool. He's pretty important to Jonathan Hickman's I Won't Say What, in case you haven't read it, because it's kind of cool. You know, you find out why he's important to
keep an eye
Krakoa.
out for the asshole Joshua, a.k.a. Elixir.
Nice.
Yeah, and something about that character, and this segues into my character, is that character was very similar to Iceman, which is that he was sort of created not intending to be this massively powerful character, right? Sort of like post-writers sort of like created in him, like evolved him, and we're like, oh, you know, because originally he was just like bring stuff back to life. He was, like you were mentioning, just like a local healer kind of character, and then some writer was like, what if that means he controls all life in all its aspects completely? Similar to Iceman, where it's like he can make. I mean, the first issue of X-Men is him throwing a snowball. Like he's literally just like a snowman, and now is like, oh, I can control heat in the universe. Okay, so. Incidentally, my character is the opposite. My character is Kid Omega, aka Quentin Quire, and he was created being like that. He would be an insanely powerful character. I mean, he's got Omega in his name, right? He was by the first appearance. Yeah, exactly. First appearance, by the way, just to give you some stats here. New X-Men number 134. It's January 2003. So this is a relatively new character. He's created by Grant Morrison. So he was created by a genius who is weird but is a genius. And it's funny. Like I always tell people, if you don't know this character but you're a DC fan, imagine if the worm Mr. Mind was like a person. Then you basically have Quentin Quire. And another thing, his name is Quintavious Quire. So cool. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, hate it. Anyway, so Quentin to give you a sense, is a massively powered psionic character. He has high levels of telepathy and telekinesis. I'll go into that a little bit more. But what's really interesting about Quentin is sort of what he is in a kind of like political sense. Quentin was a student at Professor Xavier's Xavier Institute, and he was like a star pupil. But then the political sort of situation at the time during Grant Morrison's sort of run is that in the story is that humans and mutants this is a very tense period. Like war could kick off at any moment. And there's a character that's like a famous mutant celebrity that's killed. And, sorry, I just had an alarm go off. And anyway, it radicalizes Quentin, and he starts adopting like Magneto level politics. He creates like an armed insurrection inside like of students who are like all Malcolm X-y kind of characters, and they overthrow Xavier's Institute. And he's eventually stopped or whatever. But what's also important outside of having these high-level psionic powers is that he's addicted, or was for a time, to a drug known as Kick. Have you heard of Kick before?
Yes.
So
No.
if you don't know, for a while, Kick it's a mutant growth hormone. I think it's what's called MGH. I think that's what they call it. Street name is Kick. And if people take it, like mutants take it, it makes them way more powerful, but also like, you know, kind of like PCP, like unstable and everything like that. So he uses this to make his powers even more powerful. And then they put a stop to him and everything like that. But what happens is he burns himself out on the Kick, and he discovers a new power, which is his thoughts are so advanced and powerful. He has like light speed powers, and he like moves outside of his own body and becomes discorporate and spreads globally. That's just like this astral mutant psionic energy or something like that. Which sucks for him because it basically made him dead. When he comes back, when he's finally revived, and there's a period where he's still kind of an asshole, kind of creating mischief and stuff like that. Eventually, he's embodied again, and Wolverine takes him under his wing and makes him one of the X-Men again, like as a student. And then basically that's where we are with Quentin now. I mean, there's a long road there, but that's the idea. Is he was kind of this upstart character, and then he kind of went crazy with his own power, died, was actually resurrected by the Phoenix in part, and then they bring him back under the fold. So he's kind of, now he's very Vegeta. He's very Prince Namor. He's technically a good person, but still very like Magneto-y, very skeptical of like humans.
He reminds me a lot of Loki, but if Loki leaned more good.
Yeah, I think so. Or even honestly, if you've been reading Thor comics lately, Loki's basically a good guy now. Like he's like, yeah, I mean, like we'll see if he ever turns bad again. But so very similar. And Quentin's like very arrogant too. So it's not sheerly just mischief or whatever. He really does just think he's the best thing. And in a lot of ways, he kind of is. And that's why. So he has a very striking appearance, by the way. He wants to look radical. So he has like a pink mohawk kind of thing that he does. I don't know. There's a better name. It's like a pompadour. Yeah, it's like but it's like very aggressive and glasses and everything like that. But just to say a little bit about his powers. So the X-Men are want to do the high level telekinesis, high level telepathy, moving stuff with your mind, reading thoughts, projection, ruining minds, all that kind of stuff. He has that in spades. But what makes his powers specific is that he's also got this weird form of like psionic intelligence. So his mind operates like, let's say, thousands of times more efficiently. He can contemplate complex thoughts that would melt the mind of a normal person. So they've, because it's Grant Morrison and he's always got a psychedelic element, rather than just being super intense, the idea is like he can think of things that would drive most people mad or be beyond their brains. He can think super quickly and all that kind of stuff. And then the last thing, just to give you a sense of like the way he's presented, he's super jealous of other telepaths or psionic characters that can do anything he can't, so he tries to master that skill. So if you know the character Psylocke, who was big in the 90s, will use a thing called like a psionic construct called a psi knife. Basically, it's like a energy dagger of psionic energy. She hits you with it. It doesn't cause physical pain, but your mind explodes or hurts you or whatever. So he has a version of that where he usually makes like a psionic shotgun, and that kind of manifests all his most awful, powerful powers or whatever into one blast or something like that. But yeah, honestly, this is a character. I think he's changed a lot initially. Initially, he was like, we're going to be the new Magneto, but like more nihilistic. But they've kind of made him more of a heroic character. And I actually think even though he's got very redundant powers in a way, like there's plenty of telepaths already, they've created enough new detail and cool character stuff that he really does feel like he has his own kind of niche and isn't redundant. But yeah, so that's Quentin Quire, Kid Omega. He'll melt your goddamn face.
Mine, we've talked about her before when we did our Marvel like events crossover episode. So I'm going to focus more on her powers, but it's Hope Summers. And I wanted to I found a quote about her that I think pretty much sums her up in her story. This is from Prodigy. He was a mutant that lost his powers, and then he got essentially he's a prodigy of everything because he has so much knowledge of everything. But anyway, he said, "I'm assuming you saw what she did, how her powers work. Anything you can do, anything any of us can do, she's already there. It's like someone made a voodoo doll for the whole human race. That's what Hope is. She's us, all of us." So what that means is Hope has the amazing power to pretty much mimic any power. She just has to be in the vicinity of them or even not to have their powers. And it took her a while to be able to, I guess, master it, because a lot of times, like when she was coming up or in her first couple stories, she was more reactionary. Her powers were based on emotion or something happening, and then she found out that she pretty much has a Rolodex of powers, and she can use them however she wants.
So she's like Peter from Heroes.
Right, exactly. And then if you don't know where she came from, so after House of M, when Scarlet Witch did her Scarlet Witch shit and got rid of all the X-Men, or mutants, I should say, She was the first mutant born after that, since dissemination. And even her birth caused Cerebro to explode. So that's how powerful she is. She was born, and then she made Xavier's shiny little helmet explode. And Nimrod is actually involved in this. He sent his group of pacifiers out to find her when she was a baby and kill her. Cable managed to save her. Bishop was after her. So essentially, Nimrod, the pacifiers, and Bishop all attributed her to the Antichrist as a baby. That she was going to kill millions of humans. And so they were just scared of her. And Bishop was scared that she was the reason that his future was the way it was. So Cable took her to the future to save her. One of the cool things, I guess she did, like one of her first feats, was Mystique actually kidnapped her, disguised as Mr. Sinister, to save Rogue. Like, she just put Baby Hope's head onto Rogue's, face. And it woke Rogue up from a coma that she was in, because she was dying from, I can't remember what the disease was, or the virus that she had. And it woke Rogue up and actually healed her. So that's how powerful Hope is. And I could name all the powers that she technically has, but we would be here for another hour.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about her, I mean, she's hypothetically, I suppose, the most powerful character, just by virtue of any other power on this list, or hypothetically anything else.
She has them all.
Or could at least. And yeah, I mean, the thing about her too, if you're a big Rogue fan, and Rogue's a way more popular character, Rogue has to touch people to absorb their powers, oftentimes kills them, and then usually doesn't retain that power that long. Some of Rogue's history, she's kept powers, but most of the time in her history, she doesn't. That's what separates her from Hope. Hope, basically, once she's tasted a power, so to speak, she just has it. And then the other thing to emphasize, she has the highest form of that power. Right. So she's not limited to some characters limited ability to use their powers. It's she also has the magical ability to have the highest level of the power too. She can sense it.
She's a good example of what it means to be an alpha level mutant and an omega level mutant. So Rogue let's just say Rogue is alpha level because she has to touch them. She doesn't necessarily keep the powers or whatever. And then Hope is just above her. She just has all of them. She could just, her X gene just takes all of them and then she can have them. And then one more thing, she's not necessarily actually related to the Summers, but since Cable took her and adopted her, she's technically Cyclops' adoptive granddaughter. So just so that way, because there are characters that are future kids of the Summers and all that stuff. She was born from pretty much nobodies in a town in Alaska. And she just happened to have, there was this theory, I think they even said it in, I want to say, the Messiah Complex, that she was since all of those mutants got erased, she was the embodiment of all the ones that got taken away, essentially. That's why the Messiah Complex happened, and she was supposed to be the savior. Other people thought she wasn't, so that's where Hope. She essentially manifested from a story perspective. They made this character to pretty much usher in the mutants again, and just
she's also if you don't have a sense, if you don't read X-Men stuff, the Summers family is the Skywalker family from Star Wars. They're just fated to be the most important mutants, even when they don't seem that important.
I love them.
They're great.
So yeah, that's our spotlights and that's our characters.
And that's the Omega levels.
Let's do reading recommendations, because I think it's good. These characters are kind of obscure compared to most of the other X-Men characters. It's hard to find these characters because a lot of times they're not necessarily on the covers. So I'll kick it off since I was just talking. That way I can stop talking. So I'll recommend the X-Men Messiah Complex. So that really dives into the origins of Hope and what happens and what it meant for Hope to be Hope. And And who doesn't want to see Cable running around with a baby on his chest, like in a carrier, fighting a bunch of people? It's great. I mean, it's an amazing story. It's actually by Ed Brubaker, which he's also an amazing writer. So go check that one out.
Yeah, and then mine, similarly, like, we don't have to agree on this, but I also chose the origin story here for Quentin. People have collected this in a lot of different ways, but you can find New X-Men by Grant Morrison, the Ultimate Collection, Book 2. Now, honestly, I suggest reading the whole thing because it was an amazing run. It reimagined the X-Men, fantastic stuff. But Book 2 is where Quentin's first story comes out, and it's actually really good. He's a rich character. There's a reason he attracted a lot of attention and why he's kind of been in a lot of stuff post that. But it all starts here. A lot of character potential.
Nice.
Oh, God.
You heard Kayla. She's recommending the Bible.
She would never.
Probably not.
What? I was going to recommend Decimation. It takes place after, it's like in the aftermath of House of M. And it's basically the first time his skin turns black. It's the first time he uses his power to kill someone. And it's Stryker.
Yay!
So he deserves it.
Yeah, fuck that guy.
That ties in great with my recommendation, because Messiah Complex takes place after Dissemination, so...
Oh, nice. So read Decimation first.
I mean, and read Messiah Complex just because it's like the most notable modern X-Men story.
Yeah, and also the cover looks like a movie poster, so super cool.
Nice.
So yeah, that's it. Until next time, guys.
Hey.
What?
iTunes.
Oh, yeah.
Review us on iTunes, please. You don't honestly have to do Patreon, but that would really help us.
Yeah. What he said. And I also did want to say thank you again to Will for pretty much recommending or making us do this episode. Not making us. I shouldn't say making us do this episode, but telling us to do this episode. Or
demanding.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. And that's it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at The Phantom Zone Pod for more podcast updates.